On item number 10, please. Contributions Policy 2022 amendments. That's you.
Good afternoon. So this report recommends adding to the contributions policy the investment program to support the delivery of infrastructure, to support growth in Drury that you've just endorsed. And in order to be able to deliver this infrastructure, we need to plan now for how it's going to be funded. Now, this was first consulted on in 2021, and after considering that consultation, you agreed in principle to add projects for delivery beyond 2031 to support growth in the investment priority areas, starting with Drury. But that was an agreement in principle. You wanted us to go and do further work so that the developers would have, and other submitters, would have more detailed information in front of them and more time to consider it. So we went away and we did substantial further work, got a lot of independent external advice, and we went out to consult again last year. We consulted for a 2-month period. We received extensive feedback, and after considering that feedback, as I said in the earlier meeting, we've made changes to a number of our calculations. We've looked at our growth forecasts, considering the recent plan changes that have been agreed in the area, and looking at the immediate short-term economic conditions. We've adjusted our approach to costing land and projects, and in particular our assessment of the works we'd expect developers to deliver. As a result, there's been some changes to our analysis and their costings, and ultimately the DC prices that are proposed in this report. There is some uncertainty if we're looking into the future, as Michael identified, and we've got the opportunities and the process in place to make adjustments at least every 3 years, and we can do it more immediately if required. But it's a 3-year process that Michael talked about, and that applies not just to our investments, but to our DC policy.
Excuse me, am I right in saying this is, the intent of this here is just to take what the 30-year thing that we've done for Drury and put it across all the other intensive growth areas? Is that the gist of it?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean...
Drury is the first step in that, yes.
Yeah, so this is just because one of the things that the people in Drury didn't like was it was only about Drury. So if we pass this, it gets rid of that, doesn't it? Because it's Drury and Oringa and Mangere and Northcote and Tamaki and a whole lot of other areas, is that right?
So this will deal with Drury, and then we're going to go away, and within the next 12 to 15 months we'll come back to you with proposals to take this approach in the other investment priority areas so that we can make those long-term plans to support growth in those areas and to have the funding to be able to deliver it. So in Drury, land and consents are live zoned already to eat up about half of the capacity we're looking for when it's fully built out. And growth can proceed without our plans for delivery of infrastructure and its funding in place. So we've got the endorsement of the infrastructure, we now need to look at the funding. So by adding the investments to the DC policy, we can ensure that that funding provision's in place. Now, the amendments proposed ensure that development happening now and in the future will make a fair and proportionate contribution to the cost of the infrastructure that they benefit from and are creating the need for. And this means that we won't have higher costs falling on ratepayers in the future, or the risk that we won't be able to deliver that infrastructure, and with the consequences that has for the new residents of those areas. So we consider that the proposed amendments are fairly sharing the costs between ratepayers and developers, and also fairly sharing those future risks between ratepayers and developers. We're happy to take any questions.
Councillor Newman has a question.
I support this. It's going to be so much harder than Drury because you're talking about intensification of brownfield and trying to allocate costs to reflect causation as well as the benefits received. So how do you, I mean, how do you make that variable of the benefits received and allocating the costs to reflect growth as well as for the existing community to ensure that you are compliant with that benefits received criteria that is required under the Act? Because this is, I mean, for a significantly developed, mature neighbourhood like Mount Roskill or Tamaki, Mangere, that is going to be the hardest thing. Developers would say, well, actually, the wider community is benefiting from this, therefore my share of the cost is only X, which will be significantly lower, I suspect, than what we want them to pay.
That may well be the case in some of the brownfield areas. We've got a very sound methodology for assessing the benefits and who's creating the need for investment that sits behind what we've proposed for Drury. Much of that we will be able to apply to the other greenfield areas and to the brownfield areas. However, in doing that for the brownfield, we will be looking back again to ensure there aren't any adjustments we need to make to reflect the issues that you've identified. And when we come back to you with if this is adopted, when we come back to you with proposals for the brownfields areas, we'll identify for you how we've addressed those issues.
Thank you for that. Councillor Baker.
Andrew, just in regard to this, and so notwithstanding my comments in the last item, how do we guarantee, and knowing that this is going to be like a reasonably large furry rat for some to swallow, how do we guarantee that the significant increase in DCs collected in Drury are going to be spent in Drury, because it hasn't been the case with DCs over the years? So how do we guarantee that? Because the community in Drury will be expecting to see significant investment in Drury created by these DCs and not elsewhere.
So we can only spend the DCs we're collecting in Drury on the things that we have said we're going to spend them on, and we've got a very good record keeping that allows us to do that. So we record where the DCs are received from. We know how they've been calculated, and we know whether some of that money is for a regional project or whether some of it's for a local project, and that's kept a track of to make sure we do comply with our legal obligations.
It's a very good question. In fact, I've had issues with that myself, because they can say, oh, within a ward, but some of the wards are pretty big. So if it is in Drury, it stays in Drury, not wandering in other parts of Franklin. That's your point, I think, isn't it? Or in ghastly old Papakura, which will upset a certain other gentleman to the north of me.
That's absolutely the case, and the funding areas for the proposal are included and attached in one of the attachments, and we are able to. Some of the money they'll pay will be for some of the regional projects, like the contribution to the city rail loop, but the great proportion of the charges that are in this document are for the projects in Drury. It differs between the funding areas depending on the nature of the project, but yes.
And so this is available for the developers to have a look and double check and know that it's open?
Yes.
Oh, that answer your question there, Councillor Baker? That was a very good question.
Oh, look, I was concentrating on my spring roll. Look, yeah, no, look, I'm happy with it. I mean, you know, I just want to see that it's spent in the right place. So.
Back to the spring roll. Wayne Walker, please.
Sure. Is stormwater addressed in respect of these development contributions you're proposing here?
So the stormwater, this relates to the investments that were discussed in the previous item. So it doesn't include stormwater at this stage. However, as was noted in the previous item, we are going to continue working on the stormwater, and that will be added.
So if we arrive at the other items earlier, as we've done, is there a clear understanding with the developers that the additions for stormwater are going to be added later? Do we have some sort of clause in there around that, so that we don't miss out?
That was set out in our consultation materials. It was specifically noted.
So is there a requirement that the developers have to buy into that? So when they buy into a development contributions regime, they buy into the stuff we know, and then they're going to buy into the stuff at this point that they don't know, but we're working on.
The developers don't per se buy into a development contribution regime. If they lodge a consent under the current policy or under this policy, it won't include the contributions for what we may add subsequently about development contributions for stormwater. That amendment, proposals for that amendment will come, as we discussed earlier, within the next 12 to 15 months, or 14 to 15, I think John said.
So what sort of contribution are we getting for stormwater now?
I can't tell you that exactly off the top of my head in the Drury area. We can find an answer for you and I'll get that provided to you.
So we are getting something.
We may be. I don't know exactly whether there is something specifically for Drury. I'll find an answer for you.
Thank you.
We can only include it in the policy once we've identified the yeah.
It actually leads to a very good question, is in the event later this year that Three Waters takes over stormwater, who would be applying? That would not be our problem either, would it? It suddenly become somebody else's problem. Is that right? I don't know.
Entity A would then take responsibility for managing those issues, is my understanding.
It's not clear yet, is it? Councillor Henderson. Newman, sorry.
Sorry, is Entity
Right.
A responsible for the stormwater infrastructure in the road corridor? I thought that the bill provided for the stormwater infrastructure in the road corridor would sit with us.
Oh,
Yes, that's probably a point of correct clarification. I mean, all of that stuff is still rather uncertain around the assets that are defined as being part of the water services entity that are stormwater and dual use. But I think your assumption there is probably spot on.
Okay, it appears to be no further questions about this. Is there a mover? Myself and Councillor Darby will move and second this, if that's okay. And any further commentary? It's just spreading the same jam that we've had before. Councillor Turner wishes to, and I'm happy to have
So
it.
we're just applying what we voted on before lunch to further areas, correct? I'll be abstaining, Mr Chair.
All right, all those in favour, please say aye.
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 The contrary? Please.
Oh, and Fletcher. Turner, Walker, Fletcher, abstain.
That's correct. Turner, Walker, Fletcher abstained, I believe. Thank you. Right. Obviously lunch has done us a bit of good. We got through that quite quickly, and even quicker for the next one because it's been withdrawn. So we'll go to item 12. Consideration of funding contributions to regional cultural and safety amenities. Please welcome Chris Levitt, Sarah Johnson-Smith and Tracy Shute. And Alistair himself.
Thank you, Your Worship.